The Adult Ballet Studio is a podcast featuring conversations with the empowering voices of the adult ballet community, a world where passion has no limits and dreams can take flight. My name's Elizabeth Blossfield, and I'm an adult ballet dancer and your host. Welcome to the studio. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Adult Ballet Studio. This year marks a milestone for an impactful and groundbreaking company in the contemporary dance world. It's the 25th anniversary of Stefanie Nelson Dancegroup. Founded in New York City in 2000 by choreographer Stefanie Nelson, the company has been described as instinctual, untamed, and deeply human, pushing the boundaries of performance while creating meaningful connections between artists, audiences, and communities. Stefanie has staged work all over the world, from Lincoln Center and Jacob's Pillow to international venues across Italy. She's also the founder of Dance Italia, a summer program in Lucca, Italy. Stefanie's impact extends far beyond the stage as well. In collaboration with AHRC NYC, she launched the Everyone Dance program, providing weekly classes and performance opportunities for dancers with intellectual and developmental disabilities across New York City. This spring, that work took center stage at Columbia University's Miller Theater with Everyone Dance Spring 25, a free performance featuring original works by award-winning choreographers and an audience dance party to close it out. We love a good dance party. Stefanie also founded the Moving Memory Project, an ongoing initiative that brings together artists, caregivers, and seniors to explore memory, identity, and dementia through performance. She joined the podcast to talk about 25 years of creating dance, her vision, her collaborations, and how her company continues to bring movement into new spaces of joy, healing, and transformation. I loved talking to her. Check out what she had to say. Hi, Stefanie. How are you?
I am doing well. How are you?
Hey, yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
So I'm looking forward to talking with you. Thank you for taking the time.
I'm curious if you could kind of start off talking about what drew you into the dance industry initially and some of the work that you do with Stefanie Nelson Dancegroup.
Originally, I was pre-med, and then I realized I wasn't going to make it through med school. But what I did love, and I've always loved, is dancing. So I didn't go to college as a dance major or thinking that I was going to become a dancer, but life happened and the roads opened. And yeah, I danced while I was at school. I studied with Jun Chu and June Finch, and it was what I loved the most. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll apply to grad school for something else, knowing that, the psychology route wasn't really very self-aware. And so I said, I'm going to come back to New York. I'm going to come home. I'm going to dance for a year because it's what I love. And then a year turned into many, many years. And we're about to celebrate our 25th anniversary. So that was sort of the initial spark down the dance road.
And congrats on 25 years. That's a huge milestone. And it's so interesting because, it is a lot of years, and you've done so much great work in that space, which I'm excited to talk about. It's interesting learning about your journey because I speak with a lot of professional dancers who started in these very science-based industries and then they kind of moved into the dance world. I spoke with someone previously for this podcast who started in cybersecurity and migrated more to dance. I feel like someone needs to do a study about the through line because there are a lot of dancers who are kind of using both sides of their brain in that way. It's really cool. But I love the work that you do with Stefanie Nelson Dancegroup. And as you said, you've made a huge impact. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the mission of your work, especially how you balance performance education and then also community outreach.
Yeah. So when the company started back in 2000, the vision was to make work and perform. And over the years, more recently, it's evolved into more of a community-based organization where it's our new mission statement. We use dance for healing, empowerment, and joy. I still make work, but the focus has really shifted into sort of leaning into just the joyous aspect of what dance brings to people as I get older. And can maybe do less of the things that I used to be able to do. I find that what makes me the happiest is walking into a room of people, for example, with disabilities, because we've been sort of leaning heavily into that since I got hired at AHRC NYC, which is a disabilities service organization. just walk into a room without expectation. People show up, we dance, we move. Everybody leaves happier than when they came in. It's good for the mind, it's good for the body. And when I have existential thoughts about dance all the time, and I always have. And so there's something about, well, it just makes people, it's healthy. It makes people happier. Like, what makes people happier in these times where there's a lot of things to not be happy about. And so, so we built this program called Dance Italia in Italy, and it's a similar thing. It's not for people with disabilities, but it's about bringing people into a space and having them learn something about themselves without sort of judgment or expectation of what's going to happen or where they need to be, or this idea of perfection, or this idea of somebody wanting to choose me for something, or am I going to get the part? Am I competing with the 30 people next to me? It's really about creating a space, an artistic environment where people can thrive. And the idea is sort of personal growth, not anything other than that, just personal growth, which usually joy is something that follows that.
This is so important. And I love this because this podcast, obviously the Adult Ballet Studio focuses a lot on the community of amateur adult dancers who, discovered ballet for the first time or maybe came back to it later in life. And there is that thread in all of these conversations about walking into a studio with no expectations. And that's easier said than done, especially in dance where there are so many sort of preconceptions about what you have to be. So I think that's really important work that you're doing. And I love the work that you've done with Dance Italia. Could you talk a little bit about that, how that sort of came about and some of the work that you've done kind of all over the world?
Dance Italia started when I did not get a job. That I was down. It was like there were 2 people left. I was one of the 2 people. It was my high school dance teacher, Alice Tierstein, who is a sort of legend in the dance world. She was retiring, and she said, "I'd like you to take my job." And it was a little odd. I was honored, but I wasn't teaching regularly. I certainly wasn't teaching high school students. But I thought, Alice sort of created and made me who I am. She sort of ignited this spark back in high school. I hadn't danced earlier. I wasn't a child dancer. I didn't go to dance classes as a young girl. I was very much a tomboy, and I played Little League. And Alice was really the person who sort of ignited that spark of movement. And when she was leaving, I thought, okay, I'm going to honor her. She's retiring. I'm going to throw my hat in the ring, so to speak. And I didn't get the job. And I said, if I don't get this job, I am going to start this program that I've always been dreaming about in Italy. I had run away to Italy. I lived down by the Trade Center when the World Trade Center went down in 2001. And we ran away to Italy for like 3 years. We lived in Florence. And so I made all of these connections up in Lucca, which is where the program now runs. I ended up teaching at a studio there. And I realized that dance studios were empty all over Italy because they generally aren't air conditioned or weren't at the time. And it's really hot. So coming from New York City, where space is always such a premium and it's always so hard to find and it's very expensive. And to think that all over Italy, there are all these dance studios just not open in the summer. It's just all of this free space. It's kind of incredible. So I asked the woman, Elisabetta Fiorini, if I could use her studio and start a summer dance program. And she said yes. And so I had come back home from Italy. I was there from 2003 to 2005. Came back home, had a kid, and then started Dance Italia in 2011 when I did not get the job, but then...
I love this. I love this for so many reasons. You always hear when one door closes, another one opens. But that's exactly true.
Yeah. And sometimes you just need to decide, right? You just say like, okay, well, if not this, you know? And so Dance Italia started. It was a little naive. I was thinking, how hard can it be to start a dance program? And the reality is it's a little bit hard. And I was beautifully naive because I don't know if I would have done it if I had done a ton of research and realized that there were a lot of similar programs out there. Certainly not as many as there are now. But if you build it, they come if you build it well. And so we started this community, and it's intimate and it's nurturing and it's high level. And it's one of my favorite things aside from the disability class where we walk in and leave happier. It's a similar thing. And maybe it's about going into a space, again, without expectation. It's like we started this thing. People can become anonymous for the month. They can show up at this space that we've created in Lucca, and they can be whoever they want to be for that month. Nobody knows who they are. You know what I mean? They're not going to stay. They're not digging deep roots. They just have a chance to sort of maybe be a little risky and discover. And I found that when I had moved to Italy, I started liking work that I was making in a way that I wasn't able to do when I was living here. And I think it's because it was free from expectation. I was anonymous. I literally ran away to this place, didn't know many people, and could be who I wanted. And that was very freeing, which I know is...
I think there is so much freedom in that. And it's such important work to be able to create spaces where people can feel that freedom for themselves. And, your story made me think when I was in college, one of the best pieces of advice I got, I was a journalism major and I had to take this photography journalism class. And my professor said, you always have to be a little naively optimistic in order to be creative. And that stuck with me because it's so true. You have to have this sort of naive optimism that what you're doing can work out.
Yeah, it's a really nice way to think about it. Naively optimistic. That's exactly what I was.
Yes.
Now I have words.
Yeah, and it works out so beautifully. Yeah.
I'm going to use that for future interviews.
That's great. That's perfect. Happy to be of service.
Yeah, thanks.
Also, I love, just a side note, I love that you lived in Florence. My husband and I also lived in Florence before we moved to New York, and now we live in New Jersey. It was my favorite place I've ever been. It's such a gorgeous city and so much creativity.
I'm from Jersey, so we have a lot of synergistic geographies.
Yes, that's great. A lot of connections in that way.
So did you dance when you were in Florence?
I did. Not professionally. I just took classes at Florence Dance Center.
That's where I went. Marganativo?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. That is so funny. We should have talked about this before the interview.
We should have talked about, because he was the one who gave me space. I went to a dance class there and it was supposed to be, I think it was his daughter Jada was supposed to teach. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe I'm remembering wrong because it was so long ago. Somebody was supposed to teach. I went to the class. Somebody had passed away in that person's family. There was a substitute teacher who was somebody named Roberto Casarotto. And he ended up being my rainmaker. And I ended up performing in all of these festivals because of Roberto and all because I showed up for this one dance class. And that really was what started all of my Italian connections. I ended up performing in Fabrica Europa, and then somebody saw me perform and said, oh, they're looking for a teacher up in Lucca. Would you be interested? And so then I went up to Lucca to start teaching, which is how I met Elisabetta, and which is why we're there now. It's so funny. So it really all stems back to Florence Dance Center and Keith.
Oh my gosh, that makes me so happy. Well, that was an incredible studio, and they were so supportive there. I took one dance class just once a week, ballet.
Yeah.
They were amazing.
Yeah. Wow. Small world. I mean, we know it's a small dance world, but that's,
very small. Yeah. That's a cool really connection.
Small. Yeah, definitely.
Well, I'm glad that we talked about that. And then the other thing that I'm really excited to talk to you about is your work with AHRC NYC and adults with disabilities. And I know that you teach over 150 creative community classes and also provide performance opportunities for intellectually and developmentally disabled adults. And this is so important. So can you talk about some of that work and how you make these classes accessible for that community?
Yes. So as I said, I was hired by AHRC NYC, which is a disability service organization, back in 2014. And I was hired because somebody recommended me because they knew that I had built Dance Italia. And so they knew I could build a program sort of from the ground up and make it run. The program that I was tasked with was something called One for One, which was Craig Becker, who was a residential director there, wanted the people that we support to be able to have friendships outside of AHRC. He realized that most of the friendships that were happening were from paid staff and people supported. And he thought, wouldn't it be nice to start this volunteer program where people from the community are meeting with people supported based on common interests, and sort of takes out this hierarchy of, staff and supported to a more equal, basis on which to develop a friendship. And I was hired to start this program, which we eventually named One for One. And it's kind of like Big Brother, Big Sister in the sense that it was a one-on-one pairing. And it was, like I said, based on common interests for the most part. So if somebody we supported loves knitting and crafts, and there was a volunteer who loves knitting and crafts, like that would be a good partner. And the idea was to meet minimum once a month over a course of 12 months, and to enable for a long-term friendship to develop over time. So we started this program. I was at the agency, built it. Building it is very exciting. Illustrating it, I mean, I don't know if my boss is going to hear this, but not as exciting. I love building things. And so developing the program was, because it's creative, right? I mean, it's creative when you're making something. And once it's up and running, it's a lot less creative. I realized what I love is this dance and the arts and these creative environments. And I think they're very empowering, and certainly they're good for everybody. So I ended up applying for grant funding, and over time it developed into something significant that we are able to offer. I think it's 178 classes now a year, free of charge. So thank you, New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and thank you, NISCA, and thank you, West Harlem Development Corporation. I mean, there are people who have been really supportive of this initiative, and definitely thank you, AHRC, because they definitely let me pivot. And so we provide these creative opportunities in, I want to say all 5 boroughs, but that's not necessarily true. I think we're not in Staten Island currently. And we have these sort of 2 threads of that program, which we call Everyone Dance. And one is Everyone Dance, which is for adults with disabilities who like dancing and moving. And another one is called Moving Memory. And that's specifically for disabled seniors who are also supported because AHRC supports, it's all ages. It's basically birth through death. So yeah, I could go into more detail if you're interested. That's how that started.
Yeah, I think this is great, and especially the free element to create the socioeconomic accessibility as well, because that's huge in the dance space. There's so many financial barriers. Yeah, and you mentioned Everyone Dance. I think this is such a great program, and I love that. I was reading that it focuses, as you mentioned, a lot on joy, healing, and empowerment. So, how have you seen through the performances and the classes those elements sort of showing up among your dancers?
I think that the idea is that we have a lot of different groups. Some are able to retain choreography, and some are not able to retain choreography. And so we meet people where they're at. And the performances, I'm going to air quote performances because they are sharings. Again, there's no expectation of having to do something in a certain way that has to be in a certain way. So the groups that are able to retain choreography, we generally work over the course of 10 to 12 weeks on developing a work. The person who's creating the work generally stands in front so that people can follow just in case somebody can't remember everything that we're doing. And we provide these places where we share. Anyone from the community can come to the shows. Our last performance was at Columbia University's Miller Theater, and we did an inclusive performance for the first time. Usually we just do the AHRC works that are developed, but we invited a few Barnard seniors who had these interesting works to share. And so a lot of the audience was people supported by AHRC who are not part of the dance program, who just came to support their peers. They got to see work by Dale Hensley, runs a program called Our Broadway, where Broadway stars come and they work with people we support as well. And so they shared a few numbers. Some of the dance teachers created work, shared a few numbers. We have a big dance party at the end. We invite the audience up.
I love the idea of ending every show with a dance party where you invite the audience because it's such a great communal event. And it helps the audience kind of immerse themselves in the performance even more, which is cool.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned at the beginning, and I was reading in another interview that you've said this as well, that you've always sort of wrestled with those big questions in dance, like why it matters, what it offers the world. And I'm curious how your work with Everyone Dance and the Moving Memory Project has sort of helped provide some clarity on those questions, or how has your perspective on those questions changed when you look at it through that lens?
Those are good questions. I think anytime you can visibly bring joy to a group of people, that's worthwhile, no matter what it is. I don't think just dancing, obviously, that's not the only way to get there. But I think anytime you are bringing joy to people and people feel better when they walked in, I don't think you have to question why. I don't think there's a why. It's just, it is. Sometimes when you make dance work, and I also think it's very important, but I wonder, dance audiences are small. The work is, a lot of the people who come are the dancers. And not that I question the value of that, but it can sometimes feel slightly incestuous. Building these programs, and maybe it really is just a question of social value. That's maybe a little more obvious. Obviously, anybody who's an artist, it can claim that any of their work has social value. And of course it does. But there's something more literal and maybe more obvious about these other venues where we found it feels more accessible. And so maybe it's just a quicker fix of knowing that it's happening. Yeah. I think anytime you can ask people to reflect and sort of dig a little deeper into feelings and emotions and memories and understand a little bit more about themselves as humans, artists, whatever it is, I think that's valuable in a way that isn't always as clear to me when I make a new work, even though I love making it. I love being in a room with dancers. But that feels selfish.
I know what you mean, because for anyone creative, being an artist feels so introspective and self-serving that sometimes you do question, how do I widen the scope and create those connections with the outside world? And I think the work that you're doing does that really well. And I know that you've spoken about how intellectual disabilities in particular are often overlooked in the dance world. There's more of a focus on physical disabilities. So what are some of the systemic barriers that you've seen in dance for dancers with these types of disabilities? And how do you hope to break down some of those barriers through your work?
It always comes down to money in the end. We need money to offer these classes for free. We need money to pay the teachers. We need money to rent the space. And so people with intellectual disabilities is a harder group to, I'm not sure how to be politically correct about what I'm about to say, but it's easy to see when somebody's physically disabled, as in a way that's not as easy to recognize. I can show a picture of a dance that we're doing or show a video of a dance that we're doing where everybody just looks like everybody else and it's not clear that somebody has a disability. And it doesn't need to be clear. But when funding is specifically siloed for that, I just think it's harder for the photo ops. It's harder for the, like, see what we've done. Here's the box to check. Look at how many people, like, look at what we've done. So I think it's also hard because we are asking for funding for a constituency that is not able to necessarily be in a leadership role, right? There's a lot of talk in the funder levels of, are these people represented on your board level? And we even got feedback from a grant that we had applied for. And some of the feedback was the panel had wished that we had representation on our board of this constituency. And I thought, well, I don't understand. The people that we're talking about aren't able to read necessarily. It just didn't really make sense. It wasn't well thought out in my mind. Is it a box to check? Is that what it's about? And maybe that's what I'm talking around. And supporting people with intellectual disability is just as important as supporting anybody with any disability or anybody without a disability, right? It's just bringing this art form and this expression and this creativity and this space to be creative to anybody. And so we've been lucky because we've gotten the funding and we are able to do this. But it is tricky because a lot of the models do rely on sort of representation, and you have to question, like, when it's just about checking a box and when it's about, like, realizing that you're actually just bringing something really beautiful and important to a community.
I think that's a very honest way to look at it, and an honest perspective on what's going on, because, yeah, it's true. You have to think about sort of how much of it is the reputational element, and with intellectual disabilities in particular, so much of it can be invisible, at least in a photo.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think you're right. And I hope that the dance world can get there to embrace, this community even more. I know, talking about access, this podcast audience, as I said, is made up mostly of adult dancers, a lot of amateur dancers as well. And so I'm curious, for anyone listening, do you have any advice to give them about opening up to be able to express themselves fully in a dance class, but also making sure that they can overcome the mental barrier of feeling welcome or feeling included or accepted?
Because I am that person. Because as you get older, right, your body not able to do things that you used to be able to do. And so it's just harder to then say, can I show up to a class where there are a bunch of 20-year-olds? Can I get outside of myself? Can I let my ego go long enough just to go and show up for a class? And it's easier said than done. I find spaces with no mirrors are extremely helpful. I found that even when I was 25. That has nothing to do with aging. I think when you're in a space where you can be creative and not, like, worry about what it looks like and just sort of dig into what it feels like is a way to get around that. And also, life is short, and who cares what other people think? But obviously people care about what other think. We all care about what other people think, but to get out of your own way maybe and just to show up because it's just for you. It's really just for you. You go to a class and you go somewhere, right? Not to the class. You have a journey, like, you are inspired. You go somewhere in your body. You're opening yourself in some way and you're articulating, and don't deny yourself that opportunity because of these other factors that are not important. They're there, but they're just not important.
Yeah, this is such important advice, and it's so hard to get out of your own head. But especially, as you get older and you notice your body and you're changing, and the things that you can do changing, it's really important to just be there for the joy of it. And so I think that's great advice. Even when I do these interviews, I don't like seeing my face on camera because I get too in my head about it. So I always put my notes over my face. Yeah,
same. When I heard that this was going to be a visual podcast, I thought, oh, no. But again, we get over it. It's like, be where you are, be who you are. And so that's all you can do. And especially as we get older as dancers, like, it's the best thing you could do for yourself is to keep dancing and keep moving. Move it or lose it. Yeah. It's the greatest gift you could give your body and your mind as you get older, especially.
It is. And that's what it is. It's such a gift.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And I know that ballet in particular has such a focus on technique, and sometimes the artistry or the emotional connection can get lost in that. And I was wondering if you could talk about the importance of emotional authenticity in dance, and how can ballet dancers specifically incorporate more, vulnerability into their practice?
Well, I think ballet is often to music. So I think anytime there's music, there's something to connect to in an emotional way. I think if you think of a class as a performance as opposed to that you're not a dancer, that you're a performer, that slight distinction of, I'm just going to embody and become and let the music take me somewhere, and also try to get the steps right, but also who cares if they're not right? I think if you can let go of the being right, and obviously ballet is a pursuit of this idea of perfection, right? There's this goal that's never quite attainable in ballet, which is it's a double-edged sword. It's beautiful because it always has this space for you to try to grow and get somewhere. And it's also this place that you can never really reach, which can be very frustrating. Your leg could always be higher, your toe could always be a little bit more. Why are my hips wider than I want? Like all of the things that that can be the subtext while you're in a class. But maybe just to dive into the music and the physicality of what you're doing, and to feel like it's the first time and maybe the last time. And then it's maybe infused or charged with a little more oomph. I'm never going to be here again in the same way. Like, it's kind of this yogic idea of, I'm here, I've been on the mat a million times, but today I'm here today. And like, my body's in a different place than it was yesterday, and maybe where it's going to be tomorrow. And so where am I today? And it's the idea of, again, being fully present and in the present. And so if you could show up to a class like that and just be in the present and not know where you were yesterday, or have this whole history of subtext that follows you into the room, and really just kind of be open as if it's the first time. And maybe because your body knows what to do a little bit, lucky you. But I feel like that's probably a good place to enter.
And it's true that you might be in the studio again tomorrow or next week, but you're never going to have that specific moment again. And so if you can just focus on that moment and being grateful for it, and kind of using as much as you can with what you've been given in that time, I think that's important advice, to just stay present.
Yes.
Well, given everything we've talked about, I'm curious also what changes you'd like to see happen at dance studios or within companies to become more accessible for all, minds, bodies, learning styles.
Yeah, I'm not even sure how to answer that, except to say that it's interesting because there's a disconnect between what we think of as concert dance, right, and community dance. And so I think maybe to answer that is to understand what the focus of the studio is, and how to maybe bridge those divides a little bit. I think the first step, every dance studio in your city back in the day was like walking up 5 flights of stairs, and there's something magical about that. But yeah, obviously we need to remove physical barriers so that anybody can show up and participate. Absolutely. And slowly that will happen over time. But because, dancers, again, the finance of the dance world is such that you basically have to have a 5th floor walk up to get to this little studio, where maybe there's not an elevator in the building. Maybe that'll change. That would be beautiful. But I think as many places that can sort of open and embrace, sort of the better off the field will be in general. Absolutely.
As we've talked about, your career has taken you all over the world. You've staged performances at Lincoln Center, Jacob's Pillow, in Italy. So what's next for Stefanie Nelson Dancegroup and some of the work that you're doing, or anything you want to share?
Yeah, so we're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year, which is crazy exciting. We're looking back, and of course, we're also looking ahead. I just made a piece called Dea by Dea with choreographer Maya Orkin. And right before this call, we had a meeting with a dramaturg, because it's almost there, but it's not quite there. So the next big thing, in sort of the concert world, is to get this piece out there and the final version of what it's going to be. And ideally to tour it. We would love that. And to keep offering classes free of charge for, our constituents, our community members. Keep growing Dance Italia. And by growing, I mean developing what it is, but not necessarily making it bigger, because we like that it's intimate and small, and that everybody gets nurtured and there's a lot of attention. So I don't know if we have big plans. I'd say the plans are just to kind of keep on keeping on.
Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. And I'll keep an eye out for when that piece is ready, because I'd love to come see it.
Thanks.
And we do have one last section on the podcast. It's called Petit Allegro. It's just some quick, fun questions, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
I always like to start off asking, what do you always have to have in your dance bag at every class or rehearsal?
Oh, I don't even have a dance bag.
Oh, I love that answer.
I mean, I have a little tote bag, a water bottle.
Hydration.
Right. Hydration.
What's the best advice you've received in your dance career?
Don't take yourself too seriously.
That's so important. I love that. And it goes along with the conversation we've had. Do you have any funny or memorable backstage moments that you can share?
I was performing for an audience in which my now husband was in, and he showed up to this. It was the first time he was seeing me dance, and he was with my mom, and my costume broke. And it was one of the most awful moments. Obviously, like, I danced with my right arm kind of holding my shirt up the whole time because I didn't want it to fall off. And so that was kind of a funny, embarrassing moment.
Oh my gosh, how stressful in the moment. I'm sure now you can look back on it and laugh, but so stressful. And then the last question I always like to ask everybody who comes on is, in a perfect world, what do you hope the dance industry looks like?
I hope the dance industry is open, and that it's feels accessible, and that it is, it feels like the interactions are not with people who are sort of, again, don't take yourself too seriously. It goes back to that. Like, it shouldn't feel this super hierarchical, like I'm here, you're down there. I feel like everybody can learn from everybody. And I think if maybe that hierarchy sort of became closer together, where it became more equal footing, that would be a beautiful thing.
I agree with you. That's my hope as well. That mentality needs to make its way more into the ballet industry. I see it done
Definitely.
really well at some companies, and there's a lot more change that could happen as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. This has been a fantastic discussion. And for any listeners who want to connect with you, where can people find you online?
People can find us on Instagram at SN Dance Group or Dance_Italia, or they can just look for the websites, which is sndancegroup.org or danceitalia.com.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll link to all of that in our show notes, and hopefully a lot of listeners will connect with you. And thank you again so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed this discussion and appreciate all of the work that you're doing in this space.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's always nice to feel seen.
I loved talking to Stefanie. It was so cool to discover how much we had in common, from New Jersey to New York, all the way to Florence Dance Center in Italy. The work she's doing is so important, and if you'd like to learn more or support it, I'll include links in this episode's description. By the way, we recorded this interview too early in the summer to mention this, but Stefanie Nelson Dancegroup and West Harlem Arts Alliance have a performance coming up on Thursday, September 25th at 6 p.m. in New York. Admission is free with a reservation or pay as you wish, and a link to reserve tickets is also in the show notes. Thanks to Stefanie for taking the time to speak with me, and thanks to everybody who tuned in. You can connect with me on social media at eBlossfield, YouTube at Adult Ballet Studio, or send me an email at theadultballetstudio@gmail.com. Send me any questions, comments, or suggestions for guests you'd like to see on the podcast. And if you want to hit the subscribe button or leave a rating and review, your support is so appreciated and helps this podcast grow. Happy dancing, everybody, and see you at the bar.